The first design principles we're going to talk about today are unity and variety. Unity is the quality of wholeness or oneness in a work of art. It's basically a feeling that everything comes together as one. I'm sure you've heard the term before, something being greater, the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And when a work of art is really working, when everything's really come together, we can say that it has a sense of totality or a sense of unity. Unity is closely related to variety because without variety, unity becomes too monotonous. So what we're trying to do when we are working with unity and variety is have a harmonious balance between the two. And these can be achieved in a number of different ways. So one way to achieve unity is through repetition. There's a lot of things repeated in Van Gogh's Starry Night. Probably the first thing that will pop to your mind is the repetition of the orb shapes, these circular shapes. You also see repetition of color. There's a lot of cool colors in this painting. Blue repeated again and again. Another item that you might not recognize right away is repetition, but it is registering in your mind as harmonious, is the repeated shape of this cypress tree here, repeated by the pointy shape of the spire on the church right here. So he's utilizing a lot of repetition as well as many other devices to achieve unity in this painting. Continuity is another technique for achieving unity, when things just seem to flow toward one another. So we have our focal point here, but the artist wants our eye to flow around the painting. And I want you to see how he's used the lines in the directional arc of the tree and the lines on the canyon here to create, are y'all kind of making out an elliptical shape right here? Our eye tends to follow that ellipse around and around, and every time we come back and we notice something new. You know, we notice a little detail that maybe we didn't see before, but it always brings our eye back to the focal point, the most important part of the painting. Okay. Proximity is another way of creating unity. That means that you're placing certain things close to each other. A lot of times when we have a cluster of things, like say all the objects on this sheet right here, our mind takes it in as a single unit. We may read everything in this basket all as one thing, and that's what proximity does. Probably the most unified design that anyone has ever come up with before is a checkerboard. We talked about repetition as a great way of creating unity, and there's nothing more repetitive than a black square alternating with a white square through it to fill the entire composition. The only problem when you have too much unity, you don't have any variety and it becomes boring. So this is where variety comes in to play its job. Let's just look at another checkerboard. Very similar in design. What we do like about checkerboards is they're very structured. You know, we do like that rigid repetition, but it's just we crave something different in every square. So why not have the squares be all the same size in neat little rows, but why not fill each square with a completely different color, a completely different series of shapes, and get that unity and that variety working. So let's take a slightly closer look at variety. The harmonious counterpart to unity. Variety is what we need so that we can have a harmonious painting or work of art that is not too boring, but also not too chaotic. They're hand in hand. I would say they're kind of like yin and yang in that regard. You're always trying to strike that perfect balance between the two. Because if you have too much variety and not enough unity, you have chaos, right? So there's got to be something between chaos on one hand and a checkerboard on the other hand. Okay. I know a lot of you are familiar with Andy Warhol. This is not Andy Warhol. This is an Andy Warhol knockoff. But I wanted to bring it in to show you how variety can make a very repetitive and redundant image much more interesting. Just by putting different colors in every square, we have this repeated image all of a sudden look a lot more interesting to our eyes. Let's take a look at a real Andy Warhol now. This is one of his very famous Campbell Soup series. And at first glance, it does seem kind of repetitive and monotonous. You can see he's working with that grid that provides that nice structure, to provide order and unity. You've got the repeated soup can, but there is variety, because if you look closely at this, you see that every single soup can is a different flavor of soup. And what that tends to make you do is you start looking for the differences in this sea of sameness. And so when you notice that there's chili beef and there's turkey vegetable, it makes you just kind of want to stop and read all of them, and see if maybe he include your favorite can of soup. And just as a little side note about Andy Warhol, he did eat Campbell's soup every day. Here's another Warhol. He was famous for his repeated, versions of Marilyn Monroe. And so he did tend to work in grids a lot of the time. And he took the same photograph and repeated it again and again with different color. Another example of variety, we have all these horses that are repeated. They're all running towards us, but each horse is a little different. Their legs are in a slightly different position. Some of them are closer to us than others. It's unified in that the horses are repeated, but it's varied in that the horses are not all the same. And one last example of just, variety, just kind of adding to the unity of the picture. We see this silk painting with all the wonderful variations of texture. We have the silk robes, the very kind of fanciful way that the artist has made a texture for the water, the mist, and the vegetation. Okay, so just as a last thought about unity and variety, you have to have this perfect balance between the two to have that sense of wholeness that we're always trying to achieve in art.